Tonight, the Conservatives make the case for banning smartphones in schools. I've been inside an academy with the Shadow Education Secretary, Laura Trott, who's been telling me the evidence on why there should be one is overwhelming. Also tonight, ahead of the government announcing cuts to the benefit system tomorrow, Keir Starmer's just been speaking to a room full of his backbench MPs. We'll find out how he's gone down. Irish political leaders insist the fighter Conor McGregor doesn't speak for Ireland as he spends St Patrick's Day at the White House. And later this hour, the new Canadian Prime Minister and familiar face to us in the UK, Mark Carney, will hold a press conference in London. We'll bring that to you live. Familiar faces with us tonight, Daisy McAndrew and Caroline Flint, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Monday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. There's a lot of domestic reform going on right now to the welfare system, with cuts to disability benefit on the horizon, but also to schools, because the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill is being debated in the Commons this week. Now, there's been a lot of heated debate about whether rolling back the power of academies is a good or bad thing and the impact it will have on school standards. But I also want to talk about the wellbeing part of the bill too, because there are increasing calls for the government to back a ban on mobile phones in the classroom, something they've resisted doing so far. And this comes against a rising backdrop of pressure to try and improve the regulation around young people and technology, whether banning social media for under-16s or beefing up the Online Safety Act. Now, we talk an awful lot about that pressure, but it does seem to me it's important to be open about another form of pressure too, a pressure that's coming in the other direction, a pressure from big tech firms. Now, that pressure has always existed, but something has changed. Those big tech firms now have an awful lot of influence over in the United States and a striking relationship with the president, Donald Trump. And that, of course, is a precedent that this UK government is desperate to keep on the right side of. I've been out to a school today looking into the issue. Peckham in South London, where William Blake saw an angel and Del Boy Trotter resided in Only Fools and Horses, now a diverse and vibrant corner of the capital. The Harris Academy Peckham is a co-ed secondary school where mobile phones are banned. Like every other school, they understand the pressures that children are facing online.
For us, it's about distractions. For us, it's about our children not being able to focus on their education. And even if, with the best will in the world, they will be distracted if their phone is ringing or if it interrupts a lesson. And it stops them from critical thinking. It stops our students being critical thinkers, asking great questions in the classroom if they are distracted by their phones going off.
And it seems the students themselves are also in favour of a no-phone policy in the classroom. In this school, you're not allowed phones, right? Do you think that's a good idea?
I think the phone ban helps us focus on our learning and really avoid that distraction.
At lunch and at break, rather than spending time on your phone, you're spending it with friends, talking, chit-chatting with the teachers, and just communicating and exploring life with playing games as well.
There's this expectation to conform with the influencers, with the people you see on social media, and you don't know what's going on the other side of the screen.
Everyone looks so perfect, or they've got their kind of perfect life, and it can, I think, be quite sort of damaging to your confidence.
Comparison is a killer of self-worth. So when people are comparing themselves to figures on social media with the nice partner, the house with the picket fence, the children, and they get so much done in a day. They cook, they go to the gym, and then they'll be wondering, do I have the same 24 hours as them? They get through so much.
There's a lot of reasons why this is very damaging in the classroom. And why
I sat down with the Shadow Education Secretary, Laura Trott. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Good to be in the school. You want to see a ban on smartphones in schools. Just explain why it is.
Yes, we are introducing an amendment to the Schools Bill, which is going through the House of Commons today, and we are asking for a vote on banning smartphones in schools. We know this is a massive problem up and down the country. Only 11% of schools have a full smartphone ban. 1 in 5 children are disrupted every single day in their learning because of smartphones. Parents, teachers, children are all asking for this. So we're hoping that people can put politics aside this evening and do the right thing. And it was absolutely wrong for the Education Secretary to call this amendment a gimmick, because we know it's needed.
So what impact is it having then, do you think, of having phones in schools?
Well, we know there's a lot of evidence on this now, that actually if you have smartphones in the classroom, your GCSE grades are 1 to 2 grades lower. We know that it impacts behaviour. We know that it impacts attainment. We know that it impacts reading, for example. So for all these reasons, it is absolutely the right thing to bring it forward. And this is something actually which has got cross-party consensus in many ways. The Lib Dems voted with us when we brought it forward earlier. We've got great bench MPs like Josh McAllister who've done some work on this, who have really been pushing this agenda forward too. So we're really hoping that people can do the right thing on this and vote for this amendment.
I guess my question is, as a party, you are quite proud of your record and trusting head teachers,
Yes.
right? To do the best thing, to know their schools. They know better than everyone else.
Yep.
And head teachers have the power to ban phones in schools if they want to. So why aren't you trusting them?
So I think what's been always really clear with Academy Freedoms is that we've always had safeguarding elements to that, which are in place across all schools, no matter what type. And this is a safeguarding issue. This is absolutely a safeguarding issue.
So if heads don't ban schools, they've got it wrong now.
Yes,
what you're
they
saying.
have. Yeah, absolutely. And the evidence is overwhelming. We know the impact it has on children, and that's why it's important that every school up and down the country has this ban in place.
Parents listen to this, many of them would agree with you and
Yeah.
really want to get rid of phones in schools. Some might be worried about the safety aspect of it. For kids outside the classroom, getting home, they might like the idea of kids being able to bring phones into school. So will that protection still be there?
So what we've done is we've taken the existing guidance that the Conservative government previously put in place and saying that we want to put this into legislation. And what that does is allows head teachers to specify how the ban will be put in place. So whether phones are not allowed into school at all, which some schools do at the moment, or they have to be put away in a locker during the school day. So it is up to head teachers how they implement this ban, but we're very clear that the ban needs to be in place.
My other question about schools and technology is on EdTech, which
Yes.
some people might not have heard of, right? But if you have a child at school in the minute, you'll be very familiar with it. It's basically technology in schools. So
Yeah.
there's lots of, this isn't just computing lessons, but this might be apps for you to do your maths homework on or
Yeah.
whatever it is. And it feels to me like this is becoming an increasing part of school life. I did a quite powerful interview with the actress Sophie Ridge on this, and she strongly feels that it's out of control, that we need to row back on EdTech in the classroom. What do you think?
Sophie, by the way, has done absolutely brilliant work on this whole area about the impact that social media and screens are having on our young people. She was at a roundtable that we hosted earlier on today to talk about what more we can do. I think what we know, and this is emerging evidence, is that children learn better when they write rather than when they type something on a screen. And I think this needs to be looked at in a lot more detail to understand what is actually happening.
But what's your
and
gut?
Also,
What's your
my
gut?
my
Is
gut
that-
is that we need to make sure that we instill handwriting and also with the onset of AI and all these other things, we need to make sure that what children are doing is their own work. And also, I completely agree with you, your point about parents who are desperately trying to manage screen time in their own households, but yet their child is on their iPad constantly because they're told that's where they're doing their homework. We need to make it easier for parents to police this in their own household. We need to look at the impact that this is having on children, and I'm really keen that we're pushing that work forward.
Yeah. My other question, I guess, is a bit more wide-ranging because, obviously as a politician, but also, as a mother, these are issues that we're all grappling with, right? About
Yes.
how to impact screen time in our own houses,
Yep.
about how to give our children, positive body images or to protect them against disinformation. How do you personally grapple with these challenges?
Well, so my kids are quite young. Mine are 8 and 6. I've got twin boys who are 6 and a little girl who's 8. And I think for me, they're at that younger age. However, I have been very clear with them because I see all this evidence, right, about what social media does to children. And they are not getting a smartphone until they're 16. And they're already not that happy about it. But I think it's one of those things that if actually the work of organisations like Smartphone Free Childhood, Parentkind have been fantastic at trying to make a cultural difference as to when we give our children phones and when they give them access to social media. And I'm hoping the work of the Online Safety Act, which is coming into force, I think, just this week, will hopefully make a difference as well in terms of making online safer for our children, because that's what we all need to be focused on.
How are you as a role model? Do you use your phone in front of your kids?
I try not to, but I mean, look, Sophie, this must be the same as you. I'm on my phone way more than I would like to be.
I'm addicted to mine, I'll be honest. It's not good.
It's part of our world and the way, you know, politics, media works, is that there's quite a lot of stuff that you have to respond to quite quickly. A lot of my work is done on, you know, WhatsApp. You know, there's lots of groups. You have to respond to all of them. But I try to do my best. I wouldn't say I'm perfect. I think it's very important in politics generally. We don't set ourselves up as role models. But I definitely do my best with it.
We're here in the Harris Academy in Peckham, which is one of the kind of quite aspiring schools in London. They obviously do some really great work with kids. The schools bill that we're talking about also is rolling back on some powers for academies. And I know it's something that you're against. I guess what the government would say to that is that, yes, the academy freedoms work really well in schools like this one, but there are other academies that aren't as good as this, where actually there does need to be more standards, whether it's following the national curriculum or making sure that teachers are qualified.
The schools bill that we're talking about here today, which is in the House of Commons, is a bill of two halves. The first half is around safeguarding, which, you know, we broadly agree with the principle of, although we're scrutinising the detail. The second half is about academies, as you say. What this bill does is it rolls back the consensus we've had over 2 decades on what improves failing schools. And we know that that is academy freedoms backed up by rigorous inspections. And that consensus has led to English children, we'll come to that in a second, English children being the best at reading and maths in the Western world. And they are undermining that in this bill. For what? There is no evidence that anything that they are doing in the bill will make any school better at all. In fact, there is evidence that it will make it worse.
At the same time, though, the evidence on academies is quite mixed, right? It is quite mixed. You know, if you look at, for example, the House of Commons library, yes, the higher performing academy trusts do better, right? But the lower performing ones actually tend to perform worse than maintained schools. So it's not it's quite a complicated picture.
So academies tend to take over failing schools, right? That's the first.
Well, that's
thing
what they first did, isn't it?
Yes,
but that's
and then now
50% of schools now, 50% of children now attend an academy. So that's not correct.
Yeah, and it's more
that,
in secondary schools. But I think the point is when you take over a school as an academy, the best thing that you can do is to have that academy trust taking over. There are lots of other ways that you can intervene in schools, but that has been shown to be the most effective way of doing it. And that is what we are losing in this bill. This bill also stops good schools being able to expand, which is absolute madness. It will erode parental choice. It will mean that you have that lack of element of competition in the system, which we know drives up standards too. So on every single measure of what they're doing, it will be something which will drive down standards, not drive them up. And who will that impact the most? Disadvantaged children.
There's just a couple of other issues that I'd like to get your view on, because I don't get the opportunity to sit down with you too often. One of the big stories today is Labour's changes to welfare. I'm guessing that's something that you'd welcome.
So I think, well, we still haven't seen the details, as far as I'm aware. I still haven't seen anything further today. I was Chief Secretary at the time of the election, and I remember, I'm sure you remember too, Labour saying that there was no money to be saved in welfare over and above what we'd already been scored by the OBR. They've obviously had a change of heart, but they're all over the place on this. They could have had a welfare bill in their first King's speech. It was obvious to everyone that something needed to be done. We'd already taken steps, so we're further than needed to be done. But they still don't seem to have a plan. They're incredibly divided over what is going to happen. And this is a really big issue.
I just have to pick up, because you said there that it was obvious something should be done.
Yes.
You were in power for 13 years.
No, but the point...
Wes Streeting said today in the Commons that it must be so painful for the Conservatives to watch us doing the things that they only talked about, reducing blatant state bureaucracy, investing in defence, bringing down the welfare bill. I mean, it is hard to argue with that, isn't it? You know, talked a good game on things like, you know, stopping the boats or reducing benefits, but you didn't do anything about it.
I'll tell you what this government are doing. They're taking Winterfield payment away from pensioners. They're implementing a jobs tax, which is going to make it much harder to hire people, and they're destroying education standards in this country. That would be my characterisation of this government. Now, on welfare, as I said to you, we did implement some changes which were scored by the OBR and did have savings attached to them. But we were very clear at the election that there was more to do. We set out a plan to do that.
But that's the problem. You spent all your time worrying about changing leaders rather than changing the country.
No, that's not. I mean, I think
pretty frustrating for someone like you.
To be fair, Sophie, and I think you would accept this. Obviously, the pandemic had a huge impact on welfare and welfare claimants. We saw that afterwards. We did take steps to address that. Further steps absolutely were necessary. We set those out at the election on what we would do. The Labour government said that there were no further savings that were available to come from welfare, apparently at the time. We've wasted almost an entire year because they didn't have a plan. And now belatedly, they're coming to this in a panic because they've got their emergency budget coming up, which I just don't think is good enough.
Talking about being in a panic, Dominic Cummings has been speaking to Nigel Farage potentially about the need for reform, replacing the Conservatives. There is a new group called Unite the Right, which is saying that the only way that the Conservatives could win an election is to do a deal with reform. How do you feel about that?
I just think this is all a distraction. I think I am getting on with my job, and we all are in the shadow cabinet, at just fighting this awful government with all the terrible things that they're trying to do to this country.
Apparently,
and I think that's what we need to be focused on. It really matters to people that actually they're not going to be able to go out and get a job because Labour's making it so much more expensive to hire people. It really matters to people that they can't heat their house because if they're a pensioner, because Labour have taken away their winter fuel payment. It matters to parents up and down the country that they are destroying school standards, making sure the school down the road, instead of getting bigger because it's brilliant, is going to get smaller, and that they won't implement a smartphone ban in schools. That is what we need to be focused on, not all this nonsense about who's doing what where then. That is what we need to be focused on, fighting this government.
Dominic Cummings said that the problem with the Conservatives is about half of them should be Lib Dems. He's probably talking about you there, isn't he?
I don't think he is, no.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The broadcaster, Daisy McAndrew, and the former Labour Minister, Caroline Flint. Great to have you both with us here. Right, let's talk smartphones in schools, shall we? Caroline, what's your take on this? Do you think there should be a ban?
Well, my personal view is there should be a ban. I think there's mounting evidence of the impact of smartphones on children's sense of well-being. To be honest, how it can often be used to weaponise against other children, young people, as a form of bullying. And I sort of feel that, in school there should be a space in which you can work and have relationships without smartphones. And the truth is that whilst it's quite clear that head teachers of schools could do this if they chose to, I think the numbers speak for itself. The vast majority of schools haven't got a phone ban, and that includes taking it in but keeping it in your satchel. And I think they need the cover of government to be able to do this. And again, I think, social media, as we know, has had a huge impact. You can look back at the evidence around children developing mental health and well-being. It's not the only issue, problems, but actually it is a factor. So, yeah, on this one, as a Labour person, I'm in favour of it.
Don't you think it just feels a little bit gimmicky, though? I completely agree that smartphones cause a lot of problems and do a lot of damage to teenagers. I've got two teenagers. I've seen with my own eyes all the problems that come associated with what they're accessing, what they're doing on their phones, what they're seeing, and so on. But as you said, head teachers can already do this, and they've decided not to. And when politicians say the evidence is clear, actually the schools that have decided to ban the smartphones are nearly always the schools that have a real problem with kids using smartphones when they shouldn't do. So in other words, they're schools that don't seem to have the discipline, because obviously kids shouldn't be using their smartphones during lessons. That's obvious. So it seems to me that there's a sort of genie that's out of the bottle, and we're trying to shove it back in rather than educating people not to be damaged by these phones and not to be doing the wrong things with them.
I get that, Daisy, but I sort of also feel that, one of these, because the genie's out of the bottle and because children have been allowed to have smartphones in schools, in some areas, I think it's going to be quite tough.
We just need
for
head
teachers to be as assertive by using the guidance that's already there. And what we don't want to end up is almost a two-tier system where, there are schools that are able to do this with parental backing, and in other cases it needs a little bit more oomph from the centre to make it happen
things
for
are
everyone.
out of control. I think I'm sure we all agree on that.
At the beginning of the programme, I was talking a bit about the pressure from big tech firms, and it is something that I've been thinking about recently. Obviously, I haven't got any empirical evidence on this, but what does seem quite clear to me is that big tech firms are being given more of a voice, more of a backing in Donald Trump's America, and this is quite a powerful lobbying group, if it wasn't already, even more so now?
Well, follow the money, and you can see why there's the power there. These are the biggest, richest companies in the world. So their influence is going to be enormous. And to sell the advertising, clearly they need those eyeballs on the phones and so on. So it makes perfect sense that they have that power. And of course, politicians have always been playing catch up with this. I remember sort of 10, 20 years ago reporting on these issues, and it was very clear that politicians I was interviewing, just like journalists who was doing the interview, didn't know what they were talking about when they were discussing technology. We were discussing the cloud and AI and and algorithms, and the politicians who were meant to be policing these issues and regulating it simply didn't understand it, and they've been playing catch up ever since.
It's a really good point, and particularly with AI as well, which feels like this whole new frontier that we're all trying to get our heads around.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I have to say AI has become sort of the go-to for the answer to everything that's happening in our lives. And of course it's important, but I think sometimes there's a little bit of getting ahead of ourselves when sometimes we haven't got some basic technology operating across our health service and elsewhere. Again, I mean, look at the optics of all this. I mean, Nick Clegg, former Deputy Prime Minister, former leader of the Liberal Party in this country, went to work for one of the biggest tech companies in the world, Meta and Facebook. And there was a reason, presumably, why he decided to resign when he did. They needed a more right-wing face for their operations in terms of liaison with the White House, and therefore used someone who was much more aligned to Trump's view of the world than anybody else's.
Really interesting to talk to both of you on this. Thanks. We'll have much more from you throughout the programme. Now, there's been some angry reaction from political leaders in Ireland tonight who've been insisting that Conor McGregor does not speak for Ireland. It's after the mixed martial arts fighter was welcomed into the White House earlier for a meeting with President Trump. And he spoke to reporters in the press briefing room there.
The illegal immigration racket is running ravage on the country. There are rural towns in Ireland that have been overrun in one swoop, that have become a minority in one swoop. So issues need to be addressed, and the 40 million Irish Americans, as I said, need to hear this, because if not, there will be no place to come home and visit. Ireland is at the cusp of, potentially losing its Irishness.
Well, in the last few minutes, he spoke exclusively to our correspondent, David Blevins, who joins us now. David, there's obviously controversy around McGregor being in the White House anyway because of his civil conviction for rape.
That's right. Just 5 days ago, Ireland's Prime Minister, Micheál Martin, was welcomed into the Oval Office, and there was a really awkward moment for the Taoiseach when Donald Trump described Conor McGregor as his favourite Irish person, because just 4 months ago, a woman who had accused Conor McGregor of rape won her civil case for damages in Dublin. And that's why many people find it extraordinary that today the President of the United States has welcomed Conor McGregor into the White House. The Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, in a post online said St. Patrick's Day represented the community, humanity, fellowship and friendship spirit of the people of Ireland, and that Conor McGregor didn't represent any of those things or speak for the people of Ireland. But he has now met with President Trump, and I caught up with him a few moments ago as he was leaving the West Wing. Conor, what did you say to the President? What did you say?
We had a great meeting with him. He's a great man. I told him his work rate is outstanding, and I wish him all the best.
Conor, the Taoiseach says you don't speak for the people of Ireland. Your response to that?
I am an employer of over 200 people, almost 300 people in the country of Ireland. He's an employer of none. Every available metric available to us has shown that the government of Ireland currently has failed the people of Ireland. In 10 years, Dublin city centre has gone from one of the most safest cities in Europe to one of the most dangerous. So shame on him for saying that, speaking down on an Irishman. I won't speak about him personally. Throw a jab, I could throw many jabs at them. I could throw jabs handily at them. However, I speak on the metrics, and the metrics show they've failed the people of Ireland. They do not represent the people of Ireland.
Conor,
and I'm
what
here.
do you say to people who feel it's inappropriate for you to be here, given...
God bless Ireland, God bless America.
So Conor McGregor taking his platform here to have a dig at the Irish government, and that actually may be the key that tells us what exactly he's doing in the United States, because many people here feel that he should launch his own bid for the Irish presidency later this year. That would indeed be a long shot, because back in Ireland, because of the civil action controversy, Conor McGregor's brand has been pulled from the shelves. Some of his sponsors have pulled out. So that's why people here and across the Atlantic in Ireland are shocked by today's developments, and shocked to hear the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt say that they could think of no better guest to have on St. Patrick's Day. As far as many people in Ireland are concerned, Conor McGregor would be the last name on the guest list.
David, thank you very much indeed. David Blevins there outside the White House for us. Let's bring in Caroline and Daisy again, shall we? I'm not sure what to say.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, of course, a couple of weeks ago, we had Donald Trump chumming up to Andrew Tate, and we think, well, this is, this is the way that the traffic is going in Washington, and with Donald Trump. And now, this man, obviously, it sticks in your throat. He's deeply unpleasant. He's had, as your correspondent was saying, he's had this civil case rule against him of a very serious sexual assault, and he's being lauded at the White House.
Look, we're having discussions in this country, they're having discussions in every country in Europe about issues around migration, the pressures on it and everything else, and that's a conversation that has to be had. But to have us seeming to be a representative of everything that's good about Ireland, and there's a lot good about Ireland, this man is just unbelievable, isn't it, really? And yeah, it seems like it's probably attached to a potential political bid of some sort or another, and we shall see, but it's a stunt.
And I remember in the recent Dublin unrest and riots, he was tweeting all sorts of really deeply irresponsible, incendiary language. It's nice to see, from my point of view, that some of his sponsors and people that were promoting, I think it's beer that he sells, they've been pulling his products and so on, but he's still claiming that he's, this big businessman. But it's not a good look.
And the civil conviction, the civil case, which is a case that I did follow, and some of the abuse that the woman at the centre of that has had to face, driven by fans of McGregor. It is genuinely quite shocking, actually, to see.
And the details of the case itself were deeply shocking.
Yeah, exactly. And also, this is going to be, we mentioned there about a potential political bid. That audience at the White House, with all of that entails, that is a major platform for this man.
Yeah, and one would presume they know everything about his record, both in terms of the civil suit. I think there was a criminal suit as well for another in a situation, as well as what you were saying, Daisy, about inciting language on social media as well. So they sort of know what they're doing. Apparently, President Trump is a big fan of MMA, as millions of people are around the world. But there's no doubt about it. This is a major platform to give to someone, and let's hope the 40 million Irish people in America will give him short shrift.
Yeah, and a platform as well, as you say, for his own political views, for his own political aspirations, whatever they may be, but also for the views on migration, as Caroline was saying, a debate that should be had, but against the Irish government. He was pretty clear there, talking to David too. Yeah,
it's very clear that he's been carving out a role for himself recently, doing a lot of that sort of shock jock radio type, shows. He's promoting himself as that. But I mean, this platform, it doesn't get bigger than that for self-promotion. And we know that Donald Trump has a lot of fans who would be very keen on him. That's why I mentioned Andrew Tate. It's a similar neck of the internet that these people are very, very keen on. So
that's a nice way of putting it. Thanks both. Really interesting to talk to you about that. You're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up, welfare cuts are expected to be announced tomorrow, as the Work and Pensions Secretary has promised there will be trust and fairness in the social security system.
What's it like doing this kind of stuff when he's not here?
Yeah, I miss him. He just inspired me to be a better person. He's shown us what living looks like in the toughest and most difficult of circumstances.
I'm Greg Milam, and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
Mandatory evacuation, you must leave!
For many people, Harvey is far from over. People here believe the water will be this deep for weeks. I've reported from around the world and around the UK. It isn't what politicians see from election battle buses, but what ordinary people see from the buses that shape the timetable of their lives.
I feel like there's no trust between the people and the politicians.
Labour's going to get in definitely, and they're no better than the Conservatives.
It is almost impossible to predict where these fires will go next. Ida has certainly left its mark on New Orleans.
It just feels heartbreaking.
Cartels in Mexico are flooding America with the drug. We are standing on the supply line right into the heart of America's opioid crisis. This gives you an idea of the strength of those winds, strong enough to bend and twist metal. Sky News, the full story first. Christchurch has been changed forever by what happened here.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque. That's a scene that you don't forget.
Are you trying to run me over, Sir Philip?
No, go away.
Look like it, sir. Will you respond to those who made accusations, Sir Philip?
Can you go away?
Very good morning to you all.
Morning.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
There's no sign, publicly at least, of either side being willing to give ground. Brianna's dad told Sky News what he thinks of them.
If I'm honest, I hate them. They're just evil. They'll always be monsters.
Free wherever you get your news. How do you reassure the public that all of these mistakes wouldn't be made again?
God forbid we should have to do this again.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Hello, welcome back. Now, the Work and Pension Secretary has been calling for patience ahead of controversial cuts to welfare, which we're expecting the government to announce tomorrow. It emerged over the weekend that some of the plans have been watered down, and this afternoon in the Commons, Liz Kendall has been promising she'll ensure there's trust and fairness in the social security system. At the same time, though, Number 10 are insisting there is a moral and economic case for fixing what it describes as our broken social security system. Here's our political correspondent, Liz Bates.
Cuts to welfare spending are coming, and those who rely on it are worried. At this charity-run group session in York, many received government support, including Robert, who chose to remain anonymous. He struggles with mental health and learning difficulties and says that whilst claiming benefits was necessary, he found the process tough.
It's quite a lot of things you feel uncomfortable answering, and some of them you don't want them to know about, and you always have to talk about bad days. That's very difficult to put down. Not just for me, but for a lot of people.
He uses part of his personal independence payment to access support services and fears cuts would leave him unable to pay.
I'd be more isolated, I'd bottle things up more, and to be honest, to put it simply, I would probably spend most of my time not coming out of my room, feeling very scared.
Services manager Emma is concerned about the wider impact.
They're desperate sometimes to make ends meet, and if you're looking at changing that, that's going to have a huge impact on how they access services like us and what we can offer. We'll do our level best to make sure that nobody is left at home isolated and lonely, but we have to cover costs.
The Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, needs to find savings somewhere, though, to meet her fiscal rules. And that puts PIP in the firing line with reforms worth up to £6 billion. The plans have faced a backlash from Labour MPs, but today the Work and Pension Secretary defended the approach, particularly on getting young people into work.
I really share my honourable friend's concern about the number of young people not in work due to mental health conditions. That has increased by over 25% in the last year alone, and now stands at 270,000 young people who are economically inactive due to poor mental health.
We were expecting this announcement last week, but the level of opposition took the government by surprise and forced them into a rethink. And even at this late stage, it seems they're still figuring out how to respond, whether to back down or press ahead or find some sort of compromise. And if they get it wrong, the political consequences could be big, with many Labour MPs suggesting they simply cannot support cuts that would harm the most vulnerable. Despite the strength of feeling in some parts of Westminster, though, polling suggests the public do want to see significant reforms.
We did find that there was a perception of abuse of the system, and that's why repeatedly we heard this call for reform, this call for the system to no longer be one size fits all, and to offer tailored support for those who would like to work and generosity for those who can't.
Number 10 has spent days reaching out to MPs to win their support and calm nerves ahead of what could be a divisive and difficult announcement, with the details being worked out right down to the wire. Liz Bates, Sky News, Westminster.
Right, let's talk now to our chief political correspondent, John Craig. John, no one knows better than you what's going on with MPs in Westminster.
Sure?
I am sure, actually. I'm very sure. What's your take on where the heads of the parliamentary Labour Party's at?
I think that the newer MPs who are essentially loyal. I mean, for example, I've just been at the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting where it's mostly the new MPs who turn up for that. I mean, the old lags don't turn up. The troublemakers tend not to turn up. You'll know this, Caroline. You know,
no comment.
The real troublemakers don't turn up at the PLP very often. But the newer MPs, I think some of them have been reassured, as Liz was saying in her report there. But there is this genuine worry about the so-called PIPs. And it does look as though this is personal independence payments for disabled people. There is, all the signs are that the government's backed off on that. And I think most MPs say, yes, great, get more people into work. I mean, the figures are stark, the way the bills are going up. I mean, if things continue, they'll be spending more on benefits and on education, other key services. So the government will be hoping that when Liz Kendall stands up in the Commons to announce what is only a consultation at this stage, a green paper as it's known in the jargon, a lot of MPs will say, oh, actually, it's not quite so bad after all. But it was, as we've seen in Liz's report, it was work and pensions questions today. Now, Stephen Timms was being quite sympathetic. He's the Minister of State in the department, to those who said, MPs who said, look, a lot of people have been really frightened by what they've read the last few days. I actually spoke to Stephen Timms just as he left the PLP, and he said, oh, everything's under control. I wasn't entirely convinced by that, I have to say. But I mean, Number 10 have been using words today like the moral and economic case for reform, and Liz Kendall in the Commons was talking about trust and fairness. And there is no doubt that the bills are ballooning. And we heard yesterday in an interview Wes Streeting really having a go at doctors, saying prescribing too many people on sickness benefits and so on. It was interesting, Number 10 didn't endorse that particular line of attack today. It's worth saying we're not there yet. I mean, even if we get a lot of proposals from Liz Kendall tomorrow, it's only the start of the process, really. It's a consultation, and of course, it'd probably have to be legislation. And of course, we're a long way off that yet. But there's no doubt that welfare is the thing that Labour MPs tend to rebel on, the two-child benefit cap, winter fuel payments, all these issues. And so there is potential dangers for the government, but they will be hoping that when Liz Kendall speaks in the Commons tomorrow, MPs will say, oh, not quite so bad after all.
Yeah, that might be a good result for me. John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig there. Well, welfare reform is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the broadcaster and commentator Steve Richards and the FT's Whitehall editor Lucy Fisher. Right, let's chat to Daisy and Caroline again, shall we? Caroline, what's your view on this? Do you think the government is right to be looking at squeezing the benefits bill, or do you side with those Labour MPs who are a bit jittery about this?
No, I think it's right to address some of the trends that are happening in terms of people finding themselves in a situation where they need additional support and basically be able to review about what's working. I mean, I was actually the Minister of State for Employment and Welfare Reform.
Yeah.
And I can remember when I first started in that job and Gordon Brown asked me to look at some issues around lone parents, because at that time, a lone parent didn't need to look for work until the youngest child was 16. Now, if you work that out, that could mean that a lone parent could be out of the labour market for 25 years if they've had older kids. So, I was asked to look at that and see it reduce.
That is quite controversial.
And reduce it to 12 at that time. I think it's now down to 7. And again, it wasn't saying you had to find a job. It was about looking for work. And part of that was to recognise, often for women, being out the labour market that long without engaging in some of the support services there was going to be detrimental for her, but also, I think, for family as well. Many of those women wanted that support. So, again, I faced quite a lot of grief over that at the time, and various colleagues in the Parliamentary Labour Party, various NGOs. But fundamentally, I think it was the right thing to do. And I think that's the thing here, is nobody is denying whatever side of the fence they're on, and that including within the Labour Party as well, that there is something not right with our system. And that's not necessarily just about PIPs, because I think actually if people are needing additional support, and that's for people in work and out of work, that needs to happen. It seems like the government are coming back from, rowing back from freezing it. But there is something going on in terms of particularly the young people of working age ending up in a situation, probably for good reason in many respects, not in work, but on benefits. And we've got to address that, because it cannot be right. And it is, I think it is a social imperative as much as anything else. It's about losing the potential of those young people to be in the workplace. But what we have to do to address that is going to probably cost money as well. But it costs money to engage with those young people. What was it I saw the other day? Something like I think it was on PIP, so don't shout at me, viewers, if I got this wrong. But the number of in-person assessments that take has dropped to something like 2%.
Really
if we're not engaging with people, how can we encourage them to get into work?
But this is such a difficult area for the Labour Party. I mean, John was remember, Gordon Brown had so many problems with it. Tony Blair famously talked about the scars on his back, and these were all about, issues trying to reform welfare issues. But something has gone drastically wrong since the pandemic, because, of course, we understand that our benefits bill went up and the number of people on benefits went up during the pandemic. That happened across the world. The problem is the rest of the Western world, the numbers have gone down. We're an outlier now. So something has gone very wrong specifically in this country with our benefits system. And there's a sort of perverse incentive to keep people on the sickness benefits rather than the employment benefits or get them off benefits altogether. And of course, it's rather like for the Labour Party to be voting for things like freeze off PIPs or reducing welfare sticks in the throat of a lot of Labour MPs. So this is not what they want to be elected for and want to be known for. Being accused of being to the right of George Osborne, that's incredibly painful insult to be thrown at them. And so this is very difficult politically.
Talking about Labour MPs who may be finding it difficult, we have just had a tweet through from Clive Lewis, Labour MP, who's tweeted, "My government is trying to do two incompatible things at once. On the one hand, it's trying to fix our broken welfare system and at the same time save money. This is not possible, and it is doubly impossible if we are to adhere to the Labour values people elected this government to pursue." He then goes on to say, ultimately, this Labour government is coming up against hard limits of doing what is right by our class while appeasing the interests of big business and the wealthy. They are incompatible in this instance, and they must choose in whose interest they are governing. What would you say to that?
Well, I've heard various commentators talking about, well, look, we shouldn't be doing this, we should be doing a wealth tax, I don't think that really is dealing with the problem.
No.
I think that's a distraction. We should have a welfare system that works for people, and by that, actually, when someone finds themselves out of work due to sickness or they've had an accident at work, we should have a system that really engages with that person, first to get them back to as best health as they possibly can, but also look at ways in which they can, maybe not immediately, but return to work, not maybe the same job, maybe a different job, maybe different hours. When we had the last Labour government, I just want to commend my former colleague, Anne Maguire. She was the Minister for Disabled People, and we had something called Pathways to Work. And it was specifically designed around supporting people with long-term health conditions and disabilities into work, most of whom wanted to do that, but found so many obstacles along the way. We don't have a system that engages early on, and the research seems to show when we had the old incapacity benefit, if you were on that for 2 years plus, you never returned to work. We cannot have 22, 23, 24-year-olds in larger volumes,
and that is
not
the age
ever going to work.
That is, there's a 55% increase in the under 25s who are on these benefits, and and nearly all of that has been mental health issues. So something has gone very. And I don't think either of us are saying a lot of these youngsters don't have mental health problems, but
it's the support they need.
That's a huge problem.
Yes, I mean, look at all the children we've got missing from our schools who aren't in school. They're not socialising. They're not engaged. And if you had, there is a difference, I think, between mental health and well-being and mental illness, because I think they are both important, but they are different. But, if someone's going through anxiety, if someone has felt that they are isolated and they're not socialising, we need to get in and work with those and put the resources into making sure they can find maybe sometimes baby steps,
but also
deal with that and get the right support to get back into society.
But if you get significantly more money from incapacity benefit than from some sort of getting into work, what we used to call the dole or unemployment benefit, then clearly, as night follows day, you're going to get more people claiming mental health
and
issues.
especially if nobody's coming along and engaging with you.
And in no way because obviously there's so many people who are absolutely rightly claiming it's really important to say that. But I did some volunteering work, this was a few years ago now, but I was quite struck by a guy who I spoke to then. He was amazing, did loads of work for this charity with young people who were at risk of going into crime. And he basically said that he hurt his back and he was on sickness benefit as a result, but his injury then improved. And he said how difficult it was to convince himself to tell the truth at that point, because it was frightening, because he'd be like, didn't know if he would be able to find work, if he'd be able to pay for his housing, and he had a secure payment coming in. So you can see it from that perspective.
And that's why, again, for the people like the gentleman you just mentioned, is how do we create a supportive system which does, challenge to a certain extent, because I think that's important, because we can all get into a situation where, for a number of reasons, we don't want to move out of something, but where people can try work experience, work placements, without any detriment to their benefit package. But all of that requires, and I'm glad it is a green paper. Let's not forget, it's going to be a green paper, which usually means more free-flowing discussion than a white paper. And we can have a real discussion around how we can support people, how we can make sure the safety net survives, and importantly, recognise the potential of people to actually fulfil their lives, and through work being one of the means in which they can do that.
Yeah, really interesting debate. Lots of agreement, but we don't mind that. That's fine. We can have agreement sometimes. That's all good. Thanks both very much indeed. Well, we are awaiting a press conference very shortly from the new Prime Minister of Canada. That, of course, is Mark Carney. Now, he's been at number 10. He's been meeting with Sir Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister. He's also visited Buckingham Palace for an audience with the King. Now, of course, I don't need to tell you that the visit comes amid Canada's trade war with the United States after Donald Trump hiked up tariffs on the country. He also made some pretty controversial, shall we say, comments about making Canada America's 51st state. Now, as soon as that news conference begins, we will take you there to hear the latest. But before that, we can speak to our political correspondent, Amanda Acas, who's in Downing Street for us. Amanda, what's been happening?
Well, Mark Carney arrived just before 7 o'clock. He spent around 40 minutes inside Downing Street talking to Sir Keir Starmer, leaving around 20 minutes ago or so. And we do know what they talked about at the start of that meeting, at least. Sir Keir Starmer welcomed him in very, very warmly, paid tribute to him and to Canada as a friend, as an ally, talked about shared history, shared values, shared monarch, of course, in the King, who had just been to Buckingham Palace to visit. Also, interestingly, paid tribute to his time as Governor of the Bank of England and made quite a political point, which was rather close to the wind, I would have thought, given the independence of the Bank of England, but praising him for his stewardship of the economy, said he protected some of the economy from the Conservative government at the time. time, and went on to thank him for taking part in the Coalition of the Willing, which is the Prime Minister's plan alongside President Macron of France to get a force of peacekeeping troops to be deployed to Ukraine in the event of a deal between the Ukraine and Russia in order to police that deal in future. And Mark Carney dialed into that video conference call. It was only the day after he'd been sworn in as Prime Minister of Canada on Friday. Then in response, Mark Carney, we understand, he thanked the Prime Minister, of course, talked also very warmly about the long shared history between the UK and Canada, and also went on to thank the Prime Minister for his leadership of Ukraine as well, expressing his commitment to it all. I think what's quite interesting there is that the Canadians have joined the Coalition of the Willing. They haven't yet said whether or not they would be prepared to put troops on the ground. At the moment, it's only France and the UK who have said that, and clearly there's going to be further discussions about that on Thursday, where military leaders are going to be talking about that in London. But the significance of this is really interesting because, of course, as you said in your introduction there, it comes at a very difficult time for Canada, this visit. There's a pretty tumultuous rift with the US, with President Trump threatening to annex Canada as the 51st state, slapping and threatening huge tariffs on Canadian goods, then retaliating. So he's talked about the fact that this visit to the UK and to France, where he went earlier on today, is all about trying to reinforce relationships with the Europeans. In his press conference that he had with President Macron earlier, he talked about the importance of reliable allies and reinforcing those relationships, as well as economic collaboration as opposed to confrontation. So he didn't name Donald Trump directly, but it's a pretty clear message to him there. And I'm sure the conversations in Downing Street behind me also covered trade. We know the Canadians were talking about in advance about the bilateral trading relationship, the fact the UK is the third biggest trading partner of Canada, future opportunities to expand that still further. But more broadly, I think Mark Carney talked about this being a point in global history where there's a reordering moment, he put it in his comments to Sir Keir Starmer, and I think he's very conscious of that, the fact that Canada is seeking to closely ally itself with the Europeans, while the Americans obviously have changed their focus. Donald Trump and his team have made it very clear that they're no longer focused on defending Europe. They want the Europeans to take up more of the burden of their own security, the rest of NATO to do more of that. And clearly what Mark Carney is very determined to show is that Canada is much closer to Europe now than the US. And I think that's a very powerful message that will be heard loudly here in Downing Street. Sir Keir Starmer has been criticised for not showing more solidarity and not criticising Donald Trump for his treatment of Canada because it is such a very close ally. But I think tonight will definitely be seen as a sign of real solidarity between the UK and Canada.
Yeah, Amanda, that was what I was going to ask you about next, because it is interesting to hear you talk there about this being all about Canada trying to reinforce their relationship with not only the UK but also the rest of Europe, because there was that criticism, wasn't there, that when Keir Starmer went to the White House and spoke to Donald Trump, he didn't directly raise the treatment of Canada. We've seen the trade war, we've seen the, incendiary, if you like, comments from Donald Trump saying that Canada should become a 51st state of the US. No one really knows if he's joking or not. Do you think that this visit is part of Downing Street's attempt to show that, yes, they are an ally of Canada? And is there a slightly careful tightrope, if you like, that Keir Starmer needs to tread between showing his allyship with Canada, but also, of course, making sure to protect that relationship with Donald Trump?
Yes, indeed. I think this is the same kind of approach that we've seen Downing Street take with President Zelensky and the Ukrainians as well. I think it's this kind of very softly approach with President Trump, doing all that groundwork with the meetings, the dinner we heard so much about with President Trump, making sure that he had that invitation to deliver to the president from the king for that second state visit, talking that up, all that almost flattery of President Trump, and really only allowing positive sentiments about the president to come from the UK government, not just Sir Keir Starmer, but other officials as well. And I think they've obviously seen what happens President Zelensky, of course, the most extraordinary example, but what happens to countries when they make criticism of President Trump, get involved in a kind of tit-for-tat row, that they're not going to win. That's not how they're going to kind of make their case. And I think what Sir Keir Starmer has decided the best strategy is to try and keep President Trump on side, and then just kind of gently push back in terms of support for Ukraine and the importance. He's still making that case for security guarantees to be part of that coalition of the willing, of part of any peacekeeping force, wanting some kind of American involvement. So far, he hasn't got any commitment to that from the US, but at least there seems to be a bit of a rapprochement with the Ukrainians. We've seen that sort of peace process moving forward there, at least between the US and the Ukrainians, even if the Russians aren't perhaps necessarily approaching it in the same way they'd like to see, but I think that was something that the UK was probably always expecting. But I think, again, in Canada, like the hug with President Zelensky when he came to Downing Street just the day after he'd had that terrible falling out and public humiliation in the Oval Office, it was about saying, we're here and we're still your close ally, again, once again, with the Canadians. I think that's what we saw tonight too.
OK, Amanda, we'll leave it for now, but thank you very much for all that coverage. And of course, we are awaiting that news conference with the Prime Minister of Canada. We can chat a little bit to Daisy and Caroline just as we wait for that. It's an important visit, isn't it, don't you think, for the UK, but also for Canada too? Yes,
of course. And it's been fascinating watching what's been happening in Canada. And for us to see Mark Carney come back is...
it's so familiar. It's weird, isn't it?
Such a familiar figure. I mean, actually, I think he's more familiar here than to a lot of Canadians a few months ago. And of course, he is personally a big Anglophile. He's married to a Brit. He lived here for many, many years. So, and he knows the system. He knows, and particularly with a background in finance, obviously having been, a banker before he was a central banker, Goldman Sachs and so on. So, he brings with him all that sort of trade negotiation skill set that's very, very valuable at this time when we've got tariff and trade wars and so on. So I think he's an interesting character to be watching.
I'm going to leave it now because I believe we are about to hear from Mark Carney. There we are, perfectly timed. Let's have a listen.
Bonsoir tout le monde. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I want to begin by expressing my deep gratitude to His Majesty King Charles III for his warm welcome and gracious hospitality that he showed me, he showed Canada, with today's audience. We have a steadfast defender in our sovereign. Also want to thank Prime Minister Starmer for a valuable discussion on how our long-standing economic and security partnership